Okay. Hi, and thank you for coming this morning. I am Elizabeth Keohane-Burbridge.
I'm Christine Caccipuoti.
And I'm the producer of Footnoting History, and Christine is our assistant producer. We are presenting here today specifically about one episode that we did last spring, but kind of about our approach to podcasting in general. So Christine and I went to grad school together along with a number of other people. I have a doctorate in history, Christine has a master's in history, a number of our friends so there's 6 of us on the team, and we either have masters or doctorates or ABD. And we like to talk about history. So we created Footnoting History because we thought that there might be a place for us where you could be an academic historian but also make it accessible to the public. And that seemed really important. We created it. It's going to be our 6th anniversary this February. And you can find out our details on our map, but basically what we try to do is make history very accessible. We do use academic terms at times, but we make sure to explain them on our website. We include further reading because we want to give our interpretation potentially of an event, or we try to be even-handed with it, but we also want to inspire people to study history further themselves. I am a teacher, and that also has begun to inform a lot of how I do my episodes. But we want to talk about anecdotal history and the stories we find interesting and that you don't usually spend a lot of time on. Our episodes run what is technically shorter than many, or at least many when we started. When we started, a lot of people were recording episodes that were 1 hour or more plus, and that didn't really fit into our timelines of our own lives, so we made our episodes about 15 to 25 minutes, and that's where they sit. So most people listen to them when they're on one-way commute to work. We release a new episode every 2 weeks. There are 6 hosts, and yeah.
We started making the pop culture connection maybe about a month after we started the podcast in 2013 because the Pope resigned. And we said, oh my gosh, we have a bunch of medieval historians and we need to come up with something to talk about this. And it was also around the same time that shows like the Tudors and the Borgias were on, and there was a lot of talk about, television showing religion and all that sort of thing. So that was our first connection. Then we started realizing, oh, okay, so people like it when we do this. So we started to be more intentional. We did episodes on the history of royal baby names when William and Kate were having
their first baby. Yeah.
Right.
So that was our first. That got us a lot of downloads to this day, because every time William and Kate have a new baby, that immediately gets a massive uptick because everybody's like, "What are the royal baby names?"
Right. But we've started to get kind of more creative, which leads us to the one we did this year. So Prince Harry said, I'm going to marry an American girl. And suddenly all of our feeds, social media feeds, news feeds, were just flooded with things about Wallis Simpson, because it was another royal who married an American and a big deal. So we looked at each other and we said, well, we can't do that, right? Because the whole concept of our show is we're going to talk about history that's not what everybody else is talking about. So what are we going to do? So we kind of switched it over, and we did an episode on John Quincy Adams being, actually up until the current administration, she was the only first lady born outside the United States. But at the time, it's just the only first lady who was born in Britain. So we kind of flipped it. And the reason we do that is because when you hear about a modern event or a television show, people can automatically recognize something. Like, to be even more recent, somebody tweeted me through the Footnoting History account and said, I'm a really big fan of the TV show Timeless. What episodes do you have that I can listen to that pertain to the time periods that they go to in that show? And I was like, hold on a minute. And I pulled up the episode list and I sat there going, okay, kind of, what do we have that can go with this? Which is important because when you're releasing a podcast, you're not always going to know everything that's going to be on TV or in a movie later. But just because an episode's not your newest one doesn't mean it's not an important one, and doesn't mean it's not one that you can bring out to people again. So I sat down and I made a list. If you watch this episode of Timeless, then you can listen to this episode. And every single one of those episodes had a boost in listeners. Because they're going, oh, okay, Bass Reeves showed up in Timeless when they traveled back to the 19th century. But how much of that is real, and how much of that is what I would want to talk about in my life? It does not, in my opinion, diminish the actual history. If anything, it gets people to ask more questions. And that's where we come in to answer them for those people.
And that's incredibly important, because the fact that, so I have a doctorate, Christine has a master's, people think therefore that we're only going to do academic history. And actually this is a divide that we have attempted to bridge, because academic historians do not necessarily take podcasting as a serious medium for conveying history. But then when you have that degree, other podcasters might be wary of you, that you think that you understand this better than them. So I think when we engage with the current events, with the zeitgeist, with the popular culture, and we say, no, this is totally also legitimate, and we want to use it, and we want to talk about it, and we want to keep it fun, that helps us bridge the gap between what is seen as the academic elitist and more the everyman podcaster, where we can say, this applies to all of it, and therefore history is for everyone. Right. And that's a really big part of why we started it, and why we wanted to do podcasting where it was a free medium to people, because we wanted it to be for everyone.
Just as a warning, though, somebody's always going to be annoyed at you. Like, it's going to happen. I tweeted out one time that it was the anniversary of the day that Cesare Borgia stepped down from being a cardinal. I got tweets from one guy all day long about how the fact that I had done the hashtag for the Borgias, the TV show at the bottom, meant that I didn't understand real history, and that therefore I was diminishing everything that I was saying. So there's always going to be somebody who hates you.
Yeah,
it's not a big deal.
There's definitely a lot of pushback where academic historians might say, like, well, why would you engage with that at all?
Right.
And then popular culture is, well, if you bring in the real history, then you ruin the mystique. And
right.
So they reinforce each other, and they're yin and yang, and they're enjoyable.
And things that make a good segue aren't necessarily going to be the obvious. Like I said with the Meghan Markle situation, you're not necessarily going to look at a picture of Meghan Markle and go, oh, Louisa Adams. Like, it's not the next thing that comes to you. We have an episode that's coming out today that is about the sinking of the White Ship, which happened in the 1120s. And in it, I may or may not refer to it as the 12th century Titanic. But that's going to give somebody a visual, right? You're going to immediately go, okay, I know what the Titanic is. I know what happened. I know what a big deal it was at that time. Suddenly, the 1100s doesn't seem so far away. You know, I mean, not that the Titanic was recently, but it's more recent than something that happens at that point.
Right. And I think it also, so again, with the Wallis Simpson, and why we were like, there are other episodes, and Christine had already known about John Quincy Adams and Louisa, like that was already on our radar, but it's because when everyone focuses on the one story, they begin to take only the one lessons from it. So with Wallis Simpson, it's like there was a divorce, she was Catholic, she is American, the entire issue of Edward, but there are other lessons to be learned between transatlantic relationships, transcontinental relationships, other ideas for today, how it was viewed back then, how, and I think that's when we all focus on the one thing where we say this is exactly it, then we lose a lot in our understanding of the past. And that was another reason why we went with JQA, as we began to call him, and Louisa. And it took a while. I mean, you can see that, so November 27th, 2017 is apparently when Harry and Meghan announced their engagement.
Yes, I know that off the top of my head.
Yes, I know. There we are. And we did not record that until May, and then they get married on May 19th, which is when the episode goes live, and within 5 months, that becomes our third most downloaded episode, and that includes an episode by Christine that the CBC has on one of their lists of, like, you should listen to episodes, which has blown everything else out of the water from like 4 years ago. But
that's another one that we brought back. That one was about Louis XIV having really bad dental problems, which is a lot more interesting than you think it is, because it involves like him drinking and things like coming out the side of his face, and you're like, this is disgusting. But that one also had a listener renaissance when the TV show Versailles started, because I was like, hey, he wasn't always that cute. So like I started to send things out, and all of a sudden I would see people being like, oh my gosh, well, they're not going to get to that on the show. Don't understand why that's not going to be this like series finale.
Why would you not Louis XIV 14th with his mouth falling
Right, but
off.
you just have to be willing to continually pay attention and not be afraid to make the connection. We could, which I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to, make the Meghan Markle, Prince Harry connection to Lucy Adams also apply to the current news about, I don't know if anybody read the Japanese princess
Yes.
who married a commoner and had to give up her. It can apply to anywhere. You just have to pay attention, and you have to be willing to answer questions about how they're different. Right?
Right. Because everybody wants to point out the similarities, but when you compare, you both have to compare and contrast.
Like Prince Harry is still Prince Harry.
Right.
Meghan Markle got raised up.
right.
The Japanese princess is, I don't remember
She
her
has
name,
to, no,
but she has
to step down because she has married a commoner.
There were no titles in the Louisa and John Quincy Adams, because this is actually the time period right after they decided that, we're not having
Right.
titles at this point.
And so as a, so I teach, and I teach high school, and that's another question that comes in a lot with how to use podcasts when teaching. And I do. I assign a podcast, and I do not have them answer, say, a list of questions about what happened in the episode, but for example, in U.S. history, I tie it to a larger theme. In modern world history, I just I just assigned the Louis XIV episode about his teeth, but I asked them to think about what it meant to be a monarch but living in that time period. So even though you're technically living in this ostentatious palace, what does it actually mean physically because of what is happening, what is available to you medically? And so would you want to be a monarch but you have to live in that time period?
Where they're just gonna like stick hot things in your mouth.
Well, exactly. And for this one, I just had the students listen to it because at the same point in the early 1800s, we get switching over in the United States towards companionate marriage, which means that people began to marry for love. Well, John Quincy Adams and Louisa Adams married much against his parents' suggestion, or at least his mother's suggestion, and they do marry for love. And you can get that from the many letters that they wrote to each other. And so I assign that to my students. I don't tell them I want them to look for companionate marriage. I'm just, how does this represent the change in relationships in the early 1800s? And they have to understand where that comes in. So I have taken many of our episodes and put them thematically and chronologically in order and how I would assign them, and I have shared that Google Doc and it's available online for anybody else who feels like using them. But then I create thematic questions from them where the kids get the interesting stories in 15 to 25 minute sound bites, but then they have to apply it to a larger area in history. And I have found that to be very successful because a lot of times when given assignments, students are looking for the specific answer. They think that they can control F their way through life, is how I put it, and that's where you search the word. But if you have to read an article or listen to a podcast episode, you can't do that. You have to listen to it, you have to sit back, you have to think. And I think that is one way to also continue to use podcasts, which are free. And I actually presented on this past summer. Their podcasts are free. Most students now have access to smartphones, which have podcast listening apps. And because smartphones have kind of become where you can have your monthly plan, so they are more readily available regardless of income level or even at schools. And so kids can listen and access these podcast episodes. I gave, again, a talk list this past summer where I had people from Title I schools, but their students could technically access these podcasts and then have access to information from these other places for free. There's no paywall for the school. There is nothing like that. And so I think that's a way, podcasting, to make education more equitable across the line also.
And we do have on our handy paper here, if you're looking for ways to make academic history more interesting for people who are listening to you, there are 5 points for that, which my personal favorite is, this comes back to the way I do pop culture, is anecdotes and specific things that they can, not nobody, but the person who's going to be sitting there watching a historical film or television show or reading a book about it is not necessarily going to want to listen to a podcast that's called, I don't know, the long reformation of whatever you want it to be. But if you come up and you say, well, I don't know, Elizabeth Keohane's tooth pulling exercise, they might be like, oh, okay, I recognize that name from something I've seen or read. That's something specific about that person. I can then go and listen to it, and I can tell my friends about it at lunch. That should be kind of, in our opinion, your goal, right? You want people to take the story, leave it and then go and say, hey, I heard this really cool thing, right? Because then they're remembering it enough to tell somebody else. Like Liz's favorite anecdote out of the Louisa Adams one is when I told her that John Quincy Adams was the first president to wear trousers at his inauguration. It's like, it seems like it's an aside, but you go, okay, that's actually a big change in the way fashion was done, the way a president was representing himself, and it comes out of something that you're listening to because of the royal wedding. So there are segues to be made. You have to not be afraid to make strange ones. If you can justify why you're making a strange one, you have to be willing to laugh at yourself, unless it's, of course, certain, use your humor wisely. Don't go making some sort of remark that's going to offend you or somebody else. And you have to just trust that your audience is going to follow you along. If you enable them to listen to you by not patronizing them, they will come with you on whatever the segue is that you're making, or better yet, they may propose segues to you, and then you really know that they're listening.
And this was tricky at first because we had to really work with ourselves and the rest of our team, because so many were used to giving conference papers that the way they spoke was a very quick, very jargony, including, me too. And we literally had a friend who worked at NPR listen to our episodes and give us advice on how to make it more entertaining, even if we were just alone giving the paper. And that's what you have to do. You have to be willing to say, just because it's okay in this one sphere does not mean that I should be able to carry it over to this other one. You have to be willing to adapt, and you can't think that you are too good to adapt or that your material is too good to adapt, because if you really want people to learn and from your podcast to learn history, to enjoy history, then you have to make it enjoyable. You can't just say you should be able to deal with it and follow along.
Technically we're over.
Okay, so now we are over. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
I think you guys are good. I think you get the full half hour, starting at 10:15.
Oh, okay, they're letting us go at
they're
10:15?
pushing us through.
Sweet. Okay, well, questions.
Well, we can still take questions if anyone has
we're
anything
here.
to say.
I think I saw a hand in the back. Yes.
Yeah, I'm first of all big fan, long time fan, first time coming. I do though, and I say this in a positive way, I do want to challenge you a little bit, because one of the things I actually really love about your show sometimes, or much of the time, is the degree to which there isn't always a contemporary hook.
Right.
And so maybe you can talk to that a little bit. Your tagline, best stories are always in the footnotes.
Right. Yeah.
And for me, that was always a, and maybe it's because I'm also an academic historian, but most of you work in a field outside of my own, and so it's a chance to hear stories I never would have heard.
Right.
But and this isn't as much a question, but maybe leading you to talk about something. How do you think about pitching stories that aren't tied to a royal wedding?
Oh yeah. We do that.
That's probably about 80% of what we actually do.
Right, which is why I said about, if something comes up later on, you can put it back out, because you're not going to have a pop culture event for every episode you're going to put out. You're just not. Sometimes I'll try and go with the time period. So the one that's coming out today about the White Ship sinking was in November. So I was like, okay, so lots of things happened in November. Why am I talking about the sinking of because I like the sinking of the White Ship. I don't like it. That's not nice to say about people who died on a ship. But I like to be able to talk about that story. Or you can just do something that you think somebody will like later down the line. Because there's no guarantee anybody's listening to a podcast when you release it. There just isn't, right? Because you can find it anytime you want. It's a personal radio show, basically, that you carry with you. So there is no wrong time to release something. It just has to be interesting. But usually if it's interesting to you, it'll be interesting to the person who's going to find it. You just have to know how to tell them about it.
I do think that, so about 80% of our shows are non-tied to a current event, maybe even more than 80%, but we kind of use these to get people in who might not realize that they would want to listen to us.
Right.
So the people who started listening because of the Royal Baby Names podcast were looking for royal baby names.
Right.
But then they suddenly become a subscriber, and then they're like, oh, this is a 15-minute episode, I can do that.
Right.
And then they just continue to listen. So we use those as hooks to get people who think that they might not be into history.
Right.
They might not be, they are a little nervous about academic history if they happen to look at our bios, because it does say, our degrees and various things. But I think, so we kind of use it as a hook. And for the majority of the time, yeah, it's just episodes that are interesting to us, things that come up. My most recent episodes, I teach, so I'm a medievalist by training, but I teach modern world history and U.S. history. So my most recent, like out of my last 10 episodes, I think like 7 of them have been on U.S. history. Because that, as I learn around with the students, I begin to make episodes about interesting anecdotes from the past that relate to that I can A, use in class, but B, I'm like, whoa, I never knew this and my mind is blown. And then I want to share that.
I did an episode, sorry. Oh, let's say, I feel bad, I just cut you off. I did an episode in the summer about ways to avoid being drafted by Napoleon. And that came because I was writing a fiction piece, and I need to figure out a way that a man of military age could not be in it, would avoid having been sent off to the front. So I had all this information. It was literally sitting in a binder on my desk. And I was like, I don't know what my next episode is going to be. Well, okay, so here's just some ways to do it. And it ended up being incredibly popular. And I was just like, oh. So something that you wouldn't think anybody would ever talk about, because when you hear about Napoleon, you hear everybody went into the army, everybody went to Russia, everybody went to, all these different places. Well, no one really wanted to go. A lot of people got drafted in, they got told they had to go. So you pick the strange thing, or the thing that people don't think about, and you put it out there, and sometimes that's enough. Because I've never seen that. I'm sorry, what were you going to
No, you're good. I was just going to ask how do you guys measure the success of each episode, and how do you get feedback from your listeners? Is it just through social media? Do you have other ways that you connect with them?
So we have the website where people can leave comments. We have social media. We have email that people can reach out to us on. Usually, I would say most of our feedback comes from Twitter.
Right, which is me. If anybody tweets at us, it's always me.
Yep, it's always Christine. So that is usually, it's pretty rare that we actually get like a direct email or even a comment. We did receive a comment on the Halloween episode of me talking about Jeremy Bentham, but that's because I didn't mention that he came to America post-mortem. So that is usually how we kind of get feedback from our audience. How we track the success is we just kind of see how many downloads each new episode has by about 6 weeks. But even there, it doesn't really guide what stories we tell.
No.
Yeah, like we don't say, oh, hey, that one worked really well, we should tell more stories on that type of history. It's more just like, that seems interesting, that story went really, a lot of people were really into that idea. So I guess how we track it is we kind of don't. I don't know if that makes sense also, that
it doesn't stop us.
Yeah, we enjoy that people listen to them. We enjoy that we can see how many people download them in about a 6-week time period and overall over the course of their lifetime. And we do kind of have a running thing where we look to see what are the top 10 episodes.
10,
and then we're just like, which of us is in the top 10? And we kind of stare at each other, but it's more that. Because there's 6 members, so it's not even like, how is our show doing compared to other shows? Because we kind of feel that we are in a weird middle ground, and we don't know how to compare ourselves to other shows, so we don't.
Right.
And instead we compare ourselves to each other.
We do.
Where
I have X episodes in the top 10 right now.
Yeah.
Is a big thing that goes around.
Or so those. I'll take a screenshot and I'll be like, this is it. Yeah.
I had 5.
Anyway. Yeah. Anyway, we screenshot it, so we don't compare it to other shows. We really just try and see how we are doing. And to live,
and if our general subscriber numbers.
Do you test different either formats or I mean, you say, hey, let's try this and see how it does, or do you just kind of do each episode the way you want to do it? And
we just because we want to have full creative control, each individual person. We occasionally do a 2-parter, which is like Christine and I did this episode together. But basically, none of us really want another person on our team to be our editor, beyond our sound editing. So no, we don't really say, occasionally we'll say like titles, make your titles interesting. Abstract, don't be too academic in your abstract.
We have some criteria that we work with, which is the people the podcast is about have to be deceased.
We want it to be about 20 years in the past. We try not to be too current.
And we also don't allow overt political statements. Our job is to, in our opinion, is to explain the past and let you draw your own conclusions. So if somebody came in and said, I don't know, this event just happened, I want to talk about it, then I will say no. I will say you can talk about something in history that will make people think about that, but you can't tell them that's why you're doing it.
And we've definitely done that, and we've all chosen topics. So Nathan did a topic last year on newspapers in colonial America, and the concept of free speech was definitely inspired by what is happening nationally, but he doesn't mention that in the episode.
Right.
And that way you can also use it in different ways, and that helps because a lot of people who do listen to history podcast episodes, you don't necessarily know where they fall politically. And that way you can provide them with historical detail, and yes, it is based on our interpretation of the past, but without that kind of overt commentary that some people immediately just turn it off and say, I can't listen to this.
We had one, she was a teenager, who wrote about how I had done an episode on Olga Nethersole, who was an actress who got arrested for being in a play that was considered too racy. And the play was called Sappho. And the girl listened to the episode, in which I never actually talked about the ancient Sappho, and then sent us a message saying, I looked up who Sappho was because of that episode, and I've been reading about feminism ever since. And I was like, I wasn't trying to get you to do that, but I'm so happy that you did, because anything that I do that can get somebody else to research or look into something makes me happy. So we don't really, compare.
Yeah, it's so we have those guidelines, but we kind of, I will not say that we really market ourselves. And I mean, that could be, I know that we have discussions all the time, because when people kind of stick to one theming of history or one type, that kind of helps them move into greater success because everybody knows what they're getting. But we're not really sure that we want to be that either.
Right.
And we've been doing this in this way for so many years that we get people who, it seems to work for what we want it to be. We would love to hear from you, and that would be really
And
cool.
we're very thankful that you came.
Yes, this was exciting.
Thank you.